Over the past 2 years, I've been spending a lot of my time and money on learning chess, and I've bought a lot of courses and materials. You can see the books behind me. Not all of them are chess books, but the ones that you see up here and the ones in here, they're also chess books, if you're gonna count all of them. So I've been doing all of this. I've been also on many one-on-one encounters and lessons with chess masters, and I've been learning some very valuable stuff, especially for the intermediate levels. I'm not a title player. I'm going to be, but right now I'm not. I'm at approximately 1800. And what I'm gonna do in this video is I'm gonna talk especially to people who are at the levels of, let's say, 1300, 1400. Of course, it can also apply if you're a little bit below or above, but that is the approximate range that I'm going to speak to in this video. So how to have an easier time and to win more games versus intermediate players who are at approximately 1500 and 1600, 1400. There is one idea that is very important, and what we're going to do is we're going to understand this actually by beginner players. What do we learn as beginners? We first of all learn one, opening principles, and two, we learn to not make blunders, obviously, but we're going to focus on the first one. And we're going to understand the idea that stands behind a lot of what we're going to learn in this video by understanding first of all why we learn opening principles actually. This video is not going to be about opening principles, but opening principles help us a lot in this example. Why do we learn as chess beginners that we need to develop our pieces and take over the center? There is one reason, and that is because these things, all of them, stem from one idea, which is extremely important for chess. It's basically the idea behind the chess game. And for this, we're going to use an empty board, and I'm going to put a knight here, and I'm going to put a knight here. And I'm going to ask you, the viewer, which knight in here do you think is better? Is the knight on a1 better or the knight on e5? And you're gonna immediately think, okay, obviously the knight on e5 is probably better. And then, and now I'm gonna ask you, why is it better? And so what you may think is, okay, the knight is probably in the center, and that is correct, but the more accurate way to say it is that the knight controls more squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares. We compare that to the knight on a1, controls 1, 2 squares. Now it's clear why this knight is better, because it controls more squares. That is, from what I've learned so far, the main idea of activity. When they say activity, they simply mean we want our pieces to control and aim pressure on as much squares as possible, preferred of the enemy. Well, based on this idea of activity, now it's pretty clear. We want to move the knight to b3, because then it'll control 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares, and then we want to move it to the center, so it will also control 8 squares, just like this knight. The idea of chess. The idea is we want to control more squares and to make the least active piece the most active it can be. Which brings us back to the reason that they say to us these basic opening principles. When they say develop pieces and control the center, what they mean is that your pieces are going to control more squares. Now, obviously, they say to you, first of all, to take over the center, because if you do not, then it'll be a lot harder for your pieces to aim at more squares. That's sort of like the nuance and the reason that they tell us opening principles. Now, understanding this, even if it's not the main topic of the video, is going to be extremely important. The reason is that we need to understand why rules are there for us. Basically, why we want to move the knight, for example, to f3 instead of h3. When we do these things, okay, it's becoming more easier, and we're going to think more independently for every move. So if I'm going to be in a position where I was not prepared for whatsoever, maybe my accuracy wouldn't be as high as it can be because I've not prepared for this. However, my independent thinking would be a lot better at making the correct moves. And so overall, the accuracy is going to be higher if we understand this. So for a chess game, the basic idea is activity. And from this, all other rules are coming from. That's a continuation of the idea of activity. And now once we understand this principle of piece activity and of activity overall, we now can decide a lot easier which moves to do in a chess game, in the middle game and in the end game. That is, in the opening, we're still going to be fully principled, okay, just like we had been when we started play chess, but we're going to use in a similar way these principles of the opening to the middle game and to the end game. The topic is called positional principles. Positional principles is based on this idea of piece activity. It's the topic of how well you can understand how well can you understand specific positions in chess. Everything that we're gonna do is based on this idea of activity. And so let's talk about this. So let's talk about this position and ask which side is better. I've turned off the evaluation bar so that we can ask this without needing to be interfered by it. Let's ask, based on the idea of activity, which side here is better? And I want you to notice the difference in the pawn chains and the activity of the pieces, because you have a bishop for a knight and it's equal material. So I would argue that white is slightly better. Now, why is this? The other bishop, yes, a bishop pair, are aiming to the enemy king. In the endgame, it's considered that bishops give you better endgame odds than knights. Okay, so that gives him very nice endgame advantage. We're already in the endgame, but it also applies here. And so that's one thing that I think slightly helps white in contradiction to black. I was actually black in this position. The second one is if we compare the black knight to the dark squared bishop, this bishop controls a diagonal, whilst this knight controls maybe 1, 2, which is also already blocked by a pawn, 3, 4, 5, and it supports 2 pieces. It's kind of a backward knight, okay? And knights usually love being at the 4th, at the 5th, and at the 6th square of the enemy. But bishop here is also fine. So the knight I have is relatively weak in comparison to the dark squared bishop. And that is another thing. So first of all, I have a weak knight in comparison to a strong dark squared bishop. And the second thing is that I lost the bishop pair and he still has it. So this is sort of like why I think white is still better than me in this position. So let's for a moment turn on the board analysis and we take a look. We see that actually indeed white is a little bit better than I am. He has a 0.7, 0.6 advantage according to Stockfish, which is quite nice at the end game to have. It gives you a lot of end game odds. Now, let's say that you are playing here instead of me in this example, and you would have asked, what move should I do? Based on the idea of activity again. What you probably will think is I needed to develop one of my pieces because I have less activity, and you'd be right, by the way. And in this example, what I should have done is I should have probably moved the rook. Actually, weirdly enough, to c6. Why? First of all, it supports this pawn, allows this bishop to be then free. Maybe not now because it's quite locked behind the rooks, but we could then after this move this bishop wherever we want. Plus the second one is the rook might be able to come here because it's going to make a rook slightly more active, which is very important in this position because this rook or here, and to aim at these pawns to like put pressure on them, unfortunately it doesn't reach too much, especially if we compare it to this rook, which helps quite a bit for the 2 pawns. However, I was still not aware of the idea of piece activity and that you should activate the piece which is the least active. And I've actually made a mistake. I've made the move knight to g4. Now, the idea that I had is in fact also like an understandable idea. Is I want to aim at this bishop because if he doesn't move, I'm gonna take this bishop. The pawn is gonna take, and now he also doesn't have a bishop here. We have a bishop for a bishop. Even then, if I would have done this stakes, it's still not a good thing for me because I have pawns on the light squares and my bishop is a light squared bishop. So it's actually bad for me. Even if I do this, it actually helps him even more. My opponent, what he had done is also considered actually an inaccuracy. Now, why is this an inaccuracy? Because he was thinking, and rightfully so, I want to move my bishop back because if I do not do this, if I, for example, aim against him with my pawns, obviously he's going to take my bishop, which he's right, by the way. I was actually planning to do that. However, the place where he moved his bishop was wrong. He moved the bishop all the way back to g3. Now, there's no need to do that, in fact, in this position, because remember, the principle of piece activity, we want to maintain our pieces, we want to keep them controlling as many squares as they possibly can. The bishop can come back here and he will still control a lot of squares. He controls very vital squares in my position. However, he can also bring it back to f4. And now I can do anything against it. In fact, the best move, according to the computer, is to just move my knight back here to f6. And in here, he's a lot better, in fact, than I am. Because I've picked the wrong positional idea, and he just gained another turn in exchange for that. This topic of positional principles have honestly helped me a lot, especially in the middle game. Usually intermediates and players at the 1600, 1500 in around this elo range, even 1400 and a bit above, they struggle and they have problems, including me by the way, for a while, in understanding what should we do in the middle game and in the end game. Like for example, okay, I have bishops here aiming at the enemy king, what should I do now? And this topic of positional principles may not be like the opening where you have a clear understanding of what to do, but using positional principles we can make our overall game a lot better. For example, you may have a lot of an easier time picking correct moves versus incorrect moves. I would actually now be a lot likelier to make the move rook to c6 once that I've learned about positional principles. Let's now move to another example. Okay, so now we have this position, a different one. Now it's still in the opening phases, but we're still going to do this because it's very crucial. You can use positional principles for the opening and the endgame. So let's talk about this position. So let's now take a look at this position that we have. It's still the opening phases, as we can see, and neither side is yet fully developed, but still we can apply our opening principles and knowledge to this example. So to move bishop to c5, king h1. Let's now ask, which side do you think is better in this example? And again, using the principles that we have of activity. Which side controls more squares? Which side has more active pieces? I would argue that white is slightly better, and there are two reasons for this. I was actually black in this example as well. At the time, I wasn't yet fully aware of positional principles, but now I can more easily see this stuff. Black may have a pawn chain here, which is very big. However, there are three things that are helping white. So the first thing is that he has two pieces that are already developed and are doing quite well on pressing towards the center. Second one is his pawns here. It annoys me to actually take a look even at this pawn because it quite disturbs me from doing anything here. The second thing is that he castled, plus he already has pieces that are developed. It is very convenient for him to then start developing all the remaining pieces out. The third thing is we may think that this is indeed a big pawn chain in my favor. However, take a look at this again. It blocks my white's light squared bishop, while he doesn't even have a light squared bishop, so he doesn't even need to worry about this. He traded his light squared bishop for one of my knights, so it's still absolutely fine for him because of this pawn chain. The second thing is this pawn chain is actually very weak. If someone in the future takes on c4 and takes back here, now I have double isolated pawns, and I have another pawn island here. And my pawn structure now becomes quite damaged in the queen side. It becomes very weak because of this. So let me now show you the continuation of this game. And in here, for a fact, if we take a look, we see that the computer, his best suggestion is actually to move the bishop back to a e7, because apparently here he could be probably prone to attacks, and after it takes here and once you're gonna take back, he's going to start attacking these double pawns here with queen to a e2 eventually. Maybe not immediately, but there's going to be a move with the queen where he decides to attack you. So let's say we do the weird move the computer suggests, bishop to e7, and now he takes here, d takes on c4. We take d takes c4 back, and now you can see queen e2 coming. Queen e2, he's attacking this, very obvious in this position, and now it's very tough to defend this pawn. It's basically possible. You're actually losing a pawn in here. So let's now move to the previous example where we had me basically as black making the inaccuracy here, knight to g4, and let's say he also made the inaccuracy that he have made bishop to g3, and let's see how the game continues. So I've made the move rook to f8. The idea is you may see that this is extremely bad for me. So what I've made in this position is after bishop to g3 is to move rook to f8, which apparently the computer dislikes. But again, I'm doing this in the wrong way, where this pawn is actually capable of moving to f3. He attacks my knight. Okay, he forces me to move back, and now my rook still is not as active as I was thinking it could be. And so now again, this is why the computer dislikes this move. So I move the knight back. He does h3, but the same thing happens after all. I do knight to f6, and now we see the advantage that he gets. My pieces do not control much in comparison to his that control a lot more. So For example, the best thing that I could do is if after, for example, he does bishop to d6, and so now he makes another move, which is rook to e3. Now the computer says rook e3 is the best. Rook to e6 is rook to e3 is the best, because again the idea is you're going to make this rook more active. Maybe it could come here in the future, but probably not. And that's the main idea. So here's what we learn from these ideas in games. The first thing is that after we learn the basics of opening principles, like we've talked about, we need now to learn another topic, which is a continuation in a sense, which is called positional understanding or positional principle. This is the first thing that we learn. That's the topic that we need to focus on to win other players. And if you're going to be the player who uses this topic, you will notice examples like this a lot easier, and you would be a lot likelier to not make mistakes like I have made in this example and position. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we learn about activity. The side that has more activity and his pieces are more active, especially at the end of the day, is a lot likelier to. If I go back to the move that I've made, rook f8, he's going to attack me. I move the knight back, and now after h3, knight to f6, he has a lot more activity than I have in this position. He has a 0.1 advantage to do this. His rook is a lot more active. It's on a semi-open file. Okay, I have a rook here, which doesn't do much. Okay, I still need to make it more active. And my rook here again aims at the knight. He doesn't do much by himself as well. And so a game in which side is better are dictated by which side has more activity. For the person who has more activity, you are likelier to win, as you have done it in a few moves afterwards in here. And the main way to basically make a game in your favor by activity is to make, first of all, a commitment to being more active in the opening. So for example, right here as an example, he've made a lot of good moves, if I'm going to show you, better than I've made. And so the third thing is that positional principles, they are more of a skill than a set of knowledge, which means that we may not tomorrow or the day after be extremely good after watching a few videos at it. However, over time, the more that we watch videos about positional principles and remember that the main idea of positional principles and of chess is activity, the more that we do this, our positional understanding and capabilities are going to get higher, and thus games in chess are going to be a lot easier for us to win. Maybe. And how do we memorize it in our mind? So for example, after this, if we play a bunch of games, how do we think about positional principles? What we do is we add to our thought process, so to the games that we play, we add 3 main questions. And before this, we add another command, sort of like. So the first command is after we play the opening, now we think in terms of positional principles. That is the first thing. Now the second thing is the questions. Think before every moves, we ask, what is my least active piece and where can I move it? So if I would have been in this position beforehand and I would have just thinking, what is my least active piece and where can I move it? I would have eventually came up with the thought that this rook is less active. So I would have moved it here maybe, and with the idea of in the future moving it here to aim at the enemy pawns. So that is the second thing in the first question. The second question is a continuation of the first one, is just simply maximum activity. How can I make the piece which is the least active right now the most active that it can be? So for example here, the rook is the least active. It would be the most active in my opinion if it would have been on a square like a6, where it can target this pawn here, which is going to be in a problem in the future. And so the third question is, can I win a material advantage? A material advantage doesn't need to be always like a +1 points, like winning a pawn in these types of stuff, but it can also be having a bishop for a knight. So for example, can I win a material advantage? So that's it for today's video. If you have any questions, leave them down below and I will do my best to answer all of them. And there's the first link in the description if you want me to take you 1500 Elo online. I teach mainly adults who want to improve at the game, but they may not have time or the proper understanding of certain chess topics. This is why I'm making my courses on the first link below. My name is Alon and I will see you in the next video. Bye.